Before emperors ruled Rome, there was only one true king, Jupiter, god of sky, thunder, and divine law, and few understood his full power better than Cicero, Rome's greatest statesman. Listen to how he describes the birth of Rome's first king. Once upon a time, he says, Numa Pompilius founded the city of Rome. But before he did, he visited the temple of the mighty Jove on the Capitol and asked for guidance. Jove spoke to him through an interpreter and gave him this command: "You shall be king of Rome and rule wisely and justly." Then, having received this divine mandate, Numa became Rome's first king. But what made it so that Numa became king? Not chance, not fortune, not any other god, but Jove alone. It was he who bestowed the kingship, he who ordained the order of the state, he who established the laws and appointed the magistrates. In short, he who made Rome, Rome. And that is why we say that Jupiter wasn't just a god, he was the divine constitution of Rome. He was the living embodiment of Roman law, tradition, and custom. He was the highest authority in heaven and on earth, the supreme legislator, the ultimate judge, the final arbiter of fate. And to understand what that meant, let's start with the basics. We often think of ancient gods as wild-haired weirdos who do whatever they want whenever they feel like it. But that's not how the Romans saw their deities. To them, their gods were perfect beings who exhibited the highest ideals of human excellence, and none more so than Jupiter. The Romans identified Jupiter with the Greek god Zeus, king of the Olympians. But whereas Zeus was primarily known as the god of the sky, the Romans emphasized Jupiter's role as the god of law, order, and justice. He was the upholder of cosmic harmony and the guarantor of human civilization. And nowhere was he more revered than in Rome. But why? Well, part of the answer, according to Livy, is because Rome chose Jupiter. That is to say, Jupiter didn't choose Rome, but Rome chose Jupiter. When the city was founded, the three brothers who ruled over it, Romulus, Remus, and their twin sister, divided the spoils of war among themselves. And what does Romulus get? The Capitoline Hill, which would become Jupiter's most important temple in all of Rome. So from the very beginning, Jupiter was a voluntary deity. He wasn't forced upon the Romans. They freely chose to serve him, and in doing so, they defined themselves. Their identity was inextricably linked to his. To be Roman was to be Jovian, and no wonder. After all, where did the word religion come from? Religion, it comes from the Latin word religare, which means to tie or bind. To practice religion was to practice that which bound us together. And what bound the Romans together more than anything else? The law. And who was the personification of that law? The answer is clear: Jupiter. In fact, many scholars believe that the cult of Jupiter on the Capitoline Hill developed out of an earlier cult of the archaic Italian god, the god of day. Now, the god of day. As far as we can tell, the god of day was conceived of as an abstract personification of the dawn. In other words, he was the personification of the light of day breaking through the darkness of night, bringing with it the possibility of a new beginning. And what is a new beginning without laws, without order, without justice? The god of day represented the potential for a fresh start, for a clean slate, for a world made anew. And that is precisely what Jupiter, the supreme legislator, the highest judge, the dispenser of justice and retribution, represented to the Romans. And that's why Cicero called him the father of gods and men. He was the source of all law, all order, all morality. In short, all civilization. Now, in Greek mythology, Zeus earned his title as king of the Olympians by overthrowing his father, Cronus, and leading the gods to victory in their war against the Titans. But in Roman mythology, we don't hear about a war against the Titans. In fact, when it comes to Jupiter, Livy tells us that there was no war at all. Everything was peace. Why? Because there was no threat to the cosmos. There was no chaos threatening to engulf the world. Why? Because Jupiter's nature was order. He was the embodiment of the natural order of things. He was the law of the universe, and as such, he did not have to seize power. He simply was. He always had been and always would be. But if Jupiter was so supremely powerful, if he was the supreme arbiter of fate, why did he allow evil to exist? Why did he allow wars, famines, earthquakes, disease, and death? Well, the answer is clear. He didn't. Evil was the consequence of human actions. Evil was the product of human will. And that's why Cicero said that Jupiter neither did anything nor willed anything of itself. He was impassive, absolutely impassive. He didn't interfere in human affairs. He didn't meddle in the affairs of mortals. He didn't decide who won the ball game last night, and he didn't decide whether or not your uncle got the promotion he deserved. No, Jupiter didn't care about any of that. Why? Because in the grand scheme of things, human lives were utterly insignificant. According to Cicero, if the sparrow falls from its nest, it is not the concern of Jove. Yet if a great city perishes, he does not for that reason disturb his serenity. In other words, he didn't intervene in the affairs of mortals unless absolutely necessary. And he only acted when the entire order of the cosmos was threatened. For example, when the giant Typhoeus planned to overthrow him, when the giant Alcyoneus threatened Italy, when the monster Python terrorized Delphi, when the giant Almatho tried to flood the world. Yes, in those times, Jupiter did act. He waged wars, he sent earthquakes, he unleashed pestilence. But always and forever, he did everything in accordance with the laws of nature. He never acted arbitrarily, capriciously, or whimsically. He was never moved by anything other than the need to preserve the order of the cosmos. In fact, Cicero tells us that when a storm rages, when the lightning flashes and the thunder booms, when the winds howl and the rain pours down in torrents, when waves crash and mountains tremble, all of that happens by the will of Jupiter, but not by any means of his own. Everything occurs according to the nature of things, according to the laws of physics, chemistry, and mathematics. In other words, everything happens according to immutable principles that are beyond the control of any god or mortal. Those principles are eternal and unchangeable. They are the foundation of the cosmos. They are the basis of reality. They are the ground of being. And that is why Cicero said that fortune, fate, and chance are nothing more than the effects of causes. He rejected astrology. He rejected haruspicy. He rejected any and all forms of divination. Why? Because they contradicted the rational order of the cosmos. They introduced chaos into the ordered system of things. They suggested that there was some irrational force that could overturn the established principles of nature. But Cicero knew better. He knew that nothing could do that. Nothing could shake the foundations of the cosmos. Nothing could disrupt the laws of nature. Nothing could alter the course of destiny. So what was the proper response to such overwhelming power, such absolute majesty, such boundless glory? Only reverence, awe, and respect. Only obedience to the laws of nature. Only faithfulness to the customs and traditions of Rome. Only devotion to the common good. Only fidelity to the republic. Only loyalty to the state. In short, only duty. For Cicero, the highest good was the common good. The highest duty was service to the state. And that is why he said that it is our duty as Romans to do what we can for Rome. That's why he said that fortune itself seemed to have destined him for public life. That's why he devoted his whole life to serving the Roman state. He wasn't serving himself. He wasn't serving his own interests. He was serving the interests of Rome, the interests of civilization, the interests of humanity. He was serving the interests of Jupiter. As Livy put it, when the skies thunder, it is not the clouds that speak, but Jove. In other words, when Jupiter speaks, it is through the medium of the elements. The winds carry his voice across the earth. The lightning flashes illuminate his message. The thunder booms proclaim his words. And what are those words? What is Jupiter's message to the Romans? It is this: obey my laws, uphold the order of the cosmos, preserve the natural harmony of the universe. Be just, be temperate, be courageous, be pious, be loyal. Be a Roman. If you enjoyed this episode and want to learn more about ancient Rome, then check out this playlist here. Or if you're looking for something to watch next, then click here. But now, if you'll excuse me, I have to go pray to Jupiter about something really important.